This is the United States Energy Association Power Sector Podcast. I'm Herman K. Trabish. I've covered the power sector since 2006, and I currently report for Utility Dive. In this episode of the USEA podcast series on changing energy policy priorities, we're going to talk about what to expect in the power sector under the new presidential administration and Congress as changing resources, spiking electricity demand, and extreme weather events add unprecedented stress to the U.S. power system. Rob Gramlich, founder and president of power sector consultant Grid Strategies, is going to talk about policy certainties and uncertainties, like what could happen to existing and new incentives and to approaches to generation and transmission development. Rob has been president of Grid Strategies for 8 years, and along the way, co-founded Americans for a Clean Energy Grid, the Watt Coalition, and the Future Power Markets Forum. In his almost 27 years working on power sector policy, Rob served as economic advisor to Federal Energy Regulatory Commission Chair Pat Wood, as senior economist with the PJM Interconnection Regional System Operator, and with the Wind Energy Association and Pacific Gas and Electric. Rob, do you think the IRA tax credits and other policies for utility scale and distributed resources will be subject under this new administration to significant change, like a reduction in compensation, acceleration of the phase out, or a change in the requirements for domestic content? Or do you think the new leaders will recognize the importance of the IRA benefits to their states?
Well, thanks, Herman. Great to be with you. Yeah, those are questions a lot of people are asking right now.
Yes.
I think it's important for folks to understand, for those maybe who don't follow Washington policy so closely, to distinguish between what can be done by administrative action only versus legislation, and then within legislation, what could be done
Thank you.
through the reconciliation process, which requires only a partisan vote of, in this case, Republicans, versus policy changes that would require a 60 vote Senate threshold. So
Mm,
you've asked about the tax credits. So that falls in that middle category of requires legislation, but it could be done with Republican votes only.
mm.
So they'll get a bite or two at that apple. There's debates between Republican legislators. Are they going to do one big reconciliation bill or two? Um, and that's not resolved yet. It's certainly possible to significantly curtail, or technically they could eliminate altogether the Inflation Reduction Act, tax credit incentives for clean energy and nuclear, CCS, et cetera, all the things that are in there. Um, there, of course, the reason that might not happen is because of there is support. Of course, Democrats are more supportive, but there are a dozen or so Republicans who are in districts that received some significant benefit from IRA incentives, and they're not happy about seeing that go. So, and with the razor thin majority in the House that Republicans have, all it takes is one really to raise your hand and say, no, I'm not voting for that until you change this. And so that's very, very possible. We haven't gotten to that stage yet, so it's very hard to predict at this time how that's going to shake out.
It's really hard for me to imagine a lot of these congressmen going back to their districts and saying, well, we just voted against having these developments that provide hundreds, if not thousands, of jobs and a tax base increase, right? I mean, that seems to be hard to imagine even in these crazy times.
It's true. I mean, it's easier to imagine if it's part of a massive bill that includes tax cuts and other
Uh,
things that are popular in those districts, right? Like it's not going to be an Inflation Reduction Act specific bill in any scenario. It's going to be a
mm,
massive bill. And of course, the Trump tax cuts are expiring this year. So everybody knew even before the elections that this was going to be a big tax policy year
mhm,
because certainly Republicans were going to want to extend the Trump tax cuts from Trump 1.0.
right.
And so they do want to do that. They want to do a bunch of other things that probably any given Republican House member does support and does, have a lot of political pressure to go along with the new president. Um, and they don't want to, they don't want to stick out as being the opposition to doing those
Ah,
things. So that's
yeah.
where, individual members are going to be in a tough spot. However, of course, they can speak up, and they are speaking up to their leadership about what they can go along with and what they can't.
Mm, mm. There was a flurry of development at the end of last year. Uh, People getting projects underway, and that would theoretically, I think, protect them and allow deployment of those projects and allow them to get the tax credits over the next 4 years. Do you think that will be important, or do you think that maybe just Grid Strategies released a really important study on how much load is going to grow in the coming years? Will the need to meet that load growth at low prices protect investment, even if the incentives for those resources change?
Well, thanks for referring to our grid strategies report. We've done that load forecast report now twice in the last 2 years. And of course, it did go way up. It looks like we estimated we're looking at 130 new gigawatts of power supply needed, which is a lot. We haven't seen this growth rate since the 1980s. Um, on the tax credits, there was a flurry. I mean, this is common in tax
Yeah.
incentive land, whether it's you know oil, gas, renewables, whatever it is that people want to get their projects done before there's a chance of things changing. And the way tax credits work is the developer, if they complete the project by a certain time, then next time they're filing their taxes, they just put it on there. And that's a critical point that not a lot of people follow, because it's not like you have to go back to the government or go get approval for anything. With tax credits, it's really happens automatically, and every company has to have a good tax lawyer making sure they're doing everything right. Otherwise, when they get audited, they'll be in trouble,
Mm,
and held responsible for whatever taxes they should have paid if they didn't do it right. Um, but again, that happens, between the company, their tax advisors, and the IRS. And it's not, DOE or Treasury or something, or some decision maker. Um,
mm,
so in tax policy, it's always been sort of the assumption that what happened in the past is done, and now we're talking about prospective, and kind of all things are all the issues are on the table prospectively. Um, and I think and assume that's still the case for those things that got done. It's different in the loan and grant world. And if you want to go there, DOE obviously issued a fair amount of loans through the Loan Program Office, and grants through various offices, including the Grid Deployment Office. And a lot of those grants were at various stages of completion, but in some cases, not final completion to the point where like the money actually went out the door. If the money's out the door, then it's done. But there's a lot of risk now with these recent statements and executive orders and OMB memoranda that
right.
say, basically it seems like a sort of a stop work order for anybody
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
the agency. So the tremendous amount of confusion. And this is, of course, not in energy. This is across the board.
Right.
Everybody wondering, are their contracts good? And, are, if they did everything right and they send in the invoice, will they get paid? I think a lot of people are very confused right now.
Yeah. Yeah. But we do have that load growth to meet. So ultimately, that it seems to me that could be a really important factor. But like you say, there's just enormous uncertainty. That's probably uh, well, part of what the intention is here, but we don't know at this point. Let me ask you this. Let me move on. There was a just finalized technology neutral tax credit it just became available January 1. It's for any uh, resource that can produce energy with a low emissions threshold. You think that might get used to produce more natural gas or hydrogen with carbon capture? Or do you think it might shift to nuclear, advanced geothermal? Those are things the new energy secretary Chris Wright is interested in. Um, and along the same lines, and a more immediate question, how do you think we're going to feed the electricity data centers with the enormous amount of energy they are trying to obtain? Do you think that this need for everything be the key driver?
Yeah, the technology neutral credit is a really interesting and important new evolution. The tax credits historically were singled out for certain technologies, and there were sometimes newer technologies that didn't qualify, even though they provided the same types of benefits. And so I think everybody in the clean energy space was generally supportive of, sure, if it's carbon free, if it's, it doesn't have to be this technology or that, just if you qualify under the criteria, then you get to have it. And so, and I know Senator Ron Wyden was very instrumental in that with the Senate Finance Committee. Um, so it's interesting and kind of exciting to sort of be in that world now. And as you know, Herman, and your listeners surely understand, that each resource kind of has its role in the power mix. Not all resources are operating at the same time of day or time of year. And so we're going to need clean, firm sources, that are always available or available on cold winter mornings and the times that are becoming, grid stress conditions. And so some of the newer resources that you mentioned are certainly candidates for that. I'm very excited about advanced geothermal personally, and
Yeah,
there's, other resources that could really come in here. So, um, and of course, that is all in law now, right? So it requires legislation to change that. Um, and so, the assumption I think for investors and developers is it's still in place, and let's roll. Um, uh, and then the other part of your question of how are we going to meet all this demand. So data center
right.
demand is interesting, and it's you
Yeah,
and I are talking on the week that the DeepSeek news came out of AI,
right.
lower cost, apparently lower power consumption method out of China. I'm not 100% sure I believe all the things I read about the performance of that, and who can really know. So we'll wait till more news comes out about that and whether that ends up changing power demand forecasts from AI. But yeah, so I'm still assuming there's going to be a lot of AI, a lot of demand. And so to your question, yeah, we need all of it, right? We need, I mean, wind and solar are the ones that are the most ready to go, as stated recently on an earnings call by the CEO of NextEra Energy, which is building a ton of, gas, right? And they
Hmm.
want to build more gas to do on-site natural gas. And I'm sure some of that will happen, but he's also saying you can't find a gas turbine anywhere. That's not easy either. That's going to be 2030 before we can do a lot of that at scale. And I don't hear many people saying we can do nuclear SMRs before, say, 2032. Those would be
Yeah,
great. And hopefully we'll, you know, improve that technology, bring costs down, make it scalable, all those things. But that's not a near-term solution either. So what are the near-term solutions? Really, we shouldn't be taking anything off the table. So, making sure we can continue just, on a market basis, building renewables and building anything to meet that demand is going to be needed.
yeah. The president has expressed an interest in this idea of building resources behind the meter to serve data centers. But I think FERC just made a ruling that compromises that idea. It suggested that you got to put this stuff on the power system and share it, or it's going to cost more. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing. The data center owners in all cases really want to be connected to the whole grid. And if you think about the technical reasons for that, even if you have the best on-site generator, it still has a forced outage rate of, a couple of percent at best. But
And
if
they
it's a,
can't afford a couple of
yeah,
percent
yeah,
outage.
that's right. Or if it's a gas generator, I mean, look, natural gas generators are getting availability credit at 70%. In other words, for like PJM reliability assessments, they don't assume that they're available more than 70% of the time. So if you think about, yeah, what's that data center going to do with that, whatever type of on-site generation? Uh, they're going to need access to the whole network. That's why we have power networks, right?
Right.
And for, nobody paid attention to it outside of the, insiders in the electric industry, but we all know that every generator backs up every other generator. That's how the system works, right? So
Hmm.
every hyperscaler data center owner wants that access. So they want to be connected to the grid. They might also want a lot of, quick on-site power. Um, in order to kind of get integrated more quickly, or to use the existing interconnection capacity that some, existing nuclear plant owner or somebody else might already have. Those are real advantages if you can use an existing network connection. Um, but what FERC said, and what FERC said was, I think basically, um, that the applicant in that case had not demonstrated that they would never use the grid. If they're connected to the grid and they, if their on-site generation goes down, then they're going to be using the grid, like the transmission system and ancillary services. So if they're going to sometimes potentially use it, then they're going to have to pay for it.
Yeah.
Which I mean isn't surprising. I don't think should be surprising to anyone. Um, it's not that um, the generation was taken off the market or being used by somebody else. I think the generation is more in a market um, category where they can sell the power to whoever they want to sell the power to. But if you're using the grid, the transmission system, then you're going to have to pay for it. So I think that'll get sorted out in FERC proceedings, probably, case by case, and they'll get more clarity, which is good. Everybody wants clarity, so that type of option can be pursued, and I expect it will be once they kind of know the rules.
Okay. We're almost out of time. Maybe a short answer, if it's possible, on this last question, Rob. Um, there are studies that show it's local and not federal permitting and regulatory impediments that are slowing deployment of generation and transmission. And the Manchin-Barrasso bill to streamline permitting failed last year. Will there again be FERC or congressional action on permitting and regulatory reform to enable the electric system reliability we need? And if there is, if you see that coming, how do you think it's going to come?
Yes, well, I do think the Barrasso Mansion bill will be back sometime this year. It's not on the sort of near-term agenda because Congress is doing other things. But I do think later in the year, maybe towards the late summer or fall, we'll get back to it. And I also think that bill will be the starting point, at least in the Senate. The chair of the Senate Energy Committee, Mike Lee, said so.
Mm.
And that it passed, with a 15-4, very strong bipartisan vote last year. So I think we'll get back to that. Now, on the local versus federal, where are there real issues? The answer is all of the above.
Ah,
And the, you need, if you're building infrastructure, you might need any number of, local permits, state permits, or in the federal case, there's a lot of different agencies under different statutes and processes. And so there's not really any silver bullet for permitting reform, which is why it makes my head hurt to get into it. There's not even many lawyers who really can keep track of it all. They might specialize in one or another area, but nobody can do all. I think permitting reform is like a decadal process of trying to find improvements at all of those levels in all those agencies under all those statutes. And we just have to sort through it. I hope we do, but it's kind of got to be, one area at a time.
yeah, yeah. Okay. I think that's a good place to leave it, Rob. I want to thank you. Rob Gramlich, founder and president of Power Sector Consultant Grid Strategies, has given us some incredibly valuable insights into what to expect in energy policy under the new presidential administration and Congress as changing resources, spiking electricity demand, and extreme weather events add unprecedented stress to the U.S. power system. As always, I really want to thank our listeners for taking the time to check out the USEA Power Sector Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share with everybody you know our quest for energy transition solutions. This episode was sponsored by Uplight, which creates and manages capacity for the grid through networks of connected devices that generate, shift, or save energy. Uplight empowers its 80 plus utility partners by combining best in class customer experiences with an open, flexible capacity management platform that improves grid resilience, reduces costs, and accelerates decarbonization.